Okay, this is a dry run of the first webinar. There are literally 3 trillion reasons for doing this webinar. Right now we spend 18% of our GDP, over $3 trillion, about $11,000 for every man, woman, and child in the country, compared to about 10% of the GDP in Europe. We spend too much on healthcare because we're focused on finding patents and not finding solutions. And the people that sell the patents are suppressing the natural information. And if more MDs, about half of all MDs work for a corporation, and we've got about 60,000 chiropractors. If these people started doing natural health care, more and more people would understand how natural health care outperforms what we're doing now. The other thing is, no one is teaching kindergarten. And what I mean by that is, if I go to a seminar and I'll get great information, but if I ask myself, if I didn't know anything already, if I didn't have a background, would this help me? And usually the answer is no. People that do seminars usually show how to fix the problem patients, and those are really, really, really good. But to get started, you need some basics, and you need some information that'll get you results right away. So this webinar is just some basics to get you started. There's so much more information, but the good news is 10% of the knowledge fixes 90% of the problems. It's a lot like learning the piano. When you get started, you might not know a lot of music theory, you might not be able to play a complex piece, but they can teach you chopsticks really quickly. Think of this webinar series as chopsticks. One of the reasons this approach will work is that most of the chronic health problems are self-inflicted, and we'll get into that and explain what you can do about it. The other thing that makes this viable is that we're not treating disease, we're fixing infrastructure. Like asthmatics, for example, research will show that magnesium is beneficial in asthmatic. If you give an asthmatic magnesium, they usually do better. They've actually stopped asthma attacks in the ER with IV magnesium. But you have to understand, magnesium doesn't treat asthma. It treats a magnesium deficiency. And many physicians that are wanting to get into this have a tendency to, oh, what do I do for asthma? What do I do for high blood pressure? What do I do for this or that? And really, if you focus on fixing the infrastructure, the problems tend to take care of themselves. There are protocol manuals, and those are very good. Protocol manuals usually written by somebody, they haven't seen the patient, and they're anticipating what kinds of issues you're going to find with particular problems. And a lot of them are really good. Balancing the body chemistry has a good one. And I think they're very useful, especially for your problem patients. But in the beginning, you want to just fix basic infrastructure. And when you fix infrastructure, you're never wrong. Vince Lombardi said the Packers never lost a game, we just ran out of time. The natural health care equivalent of that is you never fail to help the patient, you just didn't hit the problem hard enough. This is a model created by Manuel Sharaskin in his book Predictive Medicine, and it describes what we're doing, because we're really not treating disease, we're treating infrastructure, we're fixing infrastructure. And Sharaskin said that basically if you have the core components of health, which includes good diet, good structural integrity, good mental health, things like that, then you're perfectly healthy. But if you interfere with core components, you have a crappy diet, you don't get enough sleep, you don't get any exercise, you're too sedentary, uh, food additive, smoking, things like that will interfere with your core components of health. If the situation continues, you start having trouble with enzyme systems. Like you eat a crummy diet, you're vitamin deficient, you're needing zinc, vitamin B, magnesium, things like that. Your enzyme systems don't work as well. If the situation continues, you start having an issue with hormones. For instance, you eat a lot of sugar, you'll start having trouble with insulin and adrenal hormones, and the system isn't working quite as well. If the situation continues, you start having problems with biochemical with your general biochemistry. And you'll see that this is like in layers of problem. If the situation continues, you start having trouble with physiologic performance. And this is the patient that maybe goes from doctor to doctor. Something's wrong. I know something's wrong. And the doctors do tests and they don't find anything. We see a lot of these people in our offices. So, you know, they haven't started to exhibit signs or symptoms. Signs, which are medical tests. Symptoms are symptoms. Eventually, if the situation continues, the patient will exhibit signs and then and symptoms. Now they've got something that the doctors can treat. The problem is that medicine focuses out here. You know, they're trying to, you know, we're going to give you Breztri for your COPD. We're going to, you know, we're going to give you some kind of drug to get your insulin under control. We're going to do you know, pain control, whatever. You know, the drugs directly address the symptoms. Unfortunately, when they're doing that, this area isn't being taken care of, okay? So the idea is you want to work on this area. So the idea is you want to start making this big glob get smaller, okay? This is the magnesium for the asthmatic or anti-inflammatories or things that support the general health. And the idea is that you shrink the big blob and the symptoms go away. Very quickly, we're going to talk about Weston Price a little bit. He was a dentist that traveled the world and compared people in civilized societies to those ethnic groups living away from civilization. He found that the quote-unquote uncivilized people did not have the chronic health problems we have. Very little cancer, heart disease, no obesity, sinusitis, allergies, or diabetes. Even over generations, he found that the bone structure and teeth structure would change. You know, if they're eating a bad diet. If you look at the picture in the upper right corner, the fellow on the left is civilized. It has been eating our food, and the woman on the right has been eating her traditional diet. And he decided that civilization is where all our chronic diseases come from. So if there was an entity that caused a cancer that never existed before, created a new skin disease, tripled the incidence of diabetes, increased the incidence of gallstones, and quadrupled cardiovascular disease in men over 40, be shocked. It'd be on the cover of Time magazine. This happened to the Inuit in the 1940s. They began, their military bases started being built in the north, and they got jobs and they started eating our food. And within a generation, kids had acne. They never had acne. They had more diabetes, more cardiovascular disease, gallstones. Women started getting breast cancer where they hadn't had it. So our diet that we take for granted is what makes us sick. And the research supports Price. You'll see a lot of stuff like on Quack Watch where he's criticized and, you know, the myth of the healthy savage and all that. But there's over 1,000 research studies showing the problems with the Western diet. And every disease has an inflammation component, and the biggest source of inflammation is our diet. So you want to avoid obvious junk, chemical additives, processed vegetables, those clear vegetable oils in the grocery aisle. You want to stay away from those. You want to stay away from GMOs. They mess up your microbiome. And you want to eat organic whenever possible. The average American gets like 10 pounds of chemicals a year. So if it comes in a bottle, box, or a can, and it wasn't available 10,000 years ago, it probably isn't good for you. And see, our bad processed diet, you know, you can stop eating a processed diet, and the solution will be incomplete because after years of that, you start messing with the microbiome. You start screwing with things that grow in your intestine. And Dr. Sidney Haas came up with this specific carbohydrate diet, and Lane Gottschall wrote about it in Ending the Vicious Cycle. And it goes like this. We eat so many complex carbohydrates that they literally rot in the gut. So they grow improper GI flora, which irritates the small intestine, which decreases the production of enzymes in the small, disaccharidases and things like that. And then you have more incomplete digestion, more improper flora, and you create this cycle where you're growing bad stuff. It's causing problems, and the more problems it causes, the more bad stuff you grow. And they found that the culprit to be complex carbohydrates. So that would include things like disaccharides, like lactose or sucrose, but also things like potatoes, corn, rice, beans, things like that they we're not digesting well enough. It's not that these foods are bad for you, and you might have seen a lot about ketogenic diets and things like that, and people doing very well on it. And this might be the key, because so many people eat too many complex carbohydrates, and it's affecting their digestive system. And after a lifetime of a processed diet, sometimes you have to step away from the complex carbohydrates and start taking steps to heal the microbiome and heal the gut lining. And the specific carbohydrate, which is pretty much identical to the paleo diet, has been studied and found to help with irritable bowel disease, inflammatory bowel disease, irritable bowel syndrome, all kinds of digestive issues. Practitioners will even tell you they help with GERD and things like that. And it's just very well studied, and this is something that you might want to do for a short period with most of your patients, okay? The other thing is carotenoids. Okay, carotenoids are powerful antioxidants. They're found in vegetables, carotenes, lycopene, zeaxanthin are carotenoids, and polyphenols. Okay, these are found in vegetables too. Quercetin, hesperidin, silymarin, resveratrol. All these are polyphenols. Now these are found in vegetables. So it turns out that vegetables are a really good thing. Plus they add fiber. So what I found in my office is you have the patient avoid obvious junk. You want them to eat slowly and chew thoroughly, because that will help the digestion in general. It's easier to dissolve iron shavings in hydrochloric acid than it is in tire nails. You want them to eat paleo or along the specific carbohydrates. You take away all complex carbohydrates. And you want them to eat 75% by volume fresh fruits and vegetables, because they get polyphenols and carotenoids and also fiber. This helps fix the damage done to the gut. You have them avoid GMOs because they're heavily sprayed. A lot of these plants are developed so that they can just dump herbicides and pesticides on them. And so you want them to eat organic whenever possible, and you want them to drink a lot of water. And this is a really simple thing, and most people will cry when you tell them this, but tell them it's only for 30 days. I've had patients, I remember I had one kid had 2 ear infections a year. He's 5 years old, and every year of his life he had a couple of ear infections. But he came in, he had Ritz Bits and some kind of purple drink that he was drinking. We just took him off the junk. And I never saw him again. The mother called me, and she was mad that why didn't somebody tell her that before? I had a friend who had a sinus infection every year, and we put him on this diet. He stopped having the sinus infections. Turned out he had a gluten sensitivity. You'll fix a lot of things with this, just with the diet. And it's important that you insist on compliance for 30 days. I actually wrote this up in a handout that you can give to your patients. It's available from Zorex in a printed version with a purchase. It basically has all the information I just outlined. It's rich in nutrients, it's rich in polyphenols. It also has meal plans and recipes for your patient. I've used this, a version of this handout for years, and it just makes my life easy. You can download it for free at drvarnes.com. And you can download it for free at symptomquiz.com. Put this slide up here because you can outline a perfect program. A lot of times you have trouble getting compliance because people are addicted. They've been fed junk food from kindergarten. Okay, the schools feed this stuff. It's funny, you can't have a cigarette machine in a school cafeteria, but they feed this junk food. And Hooked, our author Michael Moss, says processed foods can be alluring in some ways as cocaine or cigarettes. He actually, in his book, he talks about the food companies, quote unquote food companies, hiring neuroscientists and looking for combinations of sugar and salt and fat and crunchiness and texture, and seeing what triggers the pleasure areas of the brain. So everyone gets addicted to this stuff. And I've found that the best way is to just do 30 days, because they're gonna weep. But 30 days is enough time they can break the pattern, and if they cheat, they start to see what the food is doing to them, and it's a very good approach. The other thing is, if you can't get compliance, I always told people that, okay, fine, you'll get more visits, you'll have more supplements, because if you look at the protocol manuals, they'll have huge amounts of supplements and they still get results. I had a fellow who had 400 triglycerides, and basically said he liked scotch, he liked candy, he doesn't want to make any changes, but he said, quote unquote, I'll take as many pills as you give me. So, I gave him fish oil, which I don't always use, but for a short period of time, and then switched him to a better oil. I gave him lipoic acid. I gave him CGF, which is a multiple for insulin insensitivity, and some niacin, a few other things. And he religiously took all the pills, and we got his triglycerides down to normal. What's interesting is that the medical doctor had wanted to just put him on a statin to fix that. He took the statin once, it made him feel so bad he quit and asked what we could do about it. Eventually he did change his diet, and the triglycerides were no longer a problem. So we're going to talk about insulin and sensitivity. It literally is the chopsticks of natural health care. There's 30.3 million Americans. 9.4% of the U.S. population has diabetes. Another 84.1 million have prediabetes or insulin insensitivity. And if that's not treated, it leads to type 2 diabetes within 5 years. The other thing is, most of these people don't know they have. 25% of the diabetics don't know they're diabetic, and only about 11% of the people with insulin insensitivity know that that's an issue. So we're talking about 100 million patients, and there's a lot of other conditions: high cholesterol, high blood pressure, heart disease. Okay, 47 million Americans have metabolic syndrome, polycystic ovaries, insomnia, low testosterone. It may help with inflammation, fatigue, stress, headaches. Most patients, if you have a chronically ill patient, everything from back pain to fatigue to any weird problems, skin problems, all kinds of things. And they also have insulin sensitivity. If you treat the insulin sensitivity, a lot of things get better. PMS, a woman, these people tend to be deficient magnesium. A woman who craves chocolate, has mood swings and breast tenderness and cramps during her period, very likely magnesium deficiency. If she needs to lose a few pounds, the whole source of the problem is insulin insensitivity. So if you address this, you're going to get a lot of chronically ill people better. And you can screen for it. I mean, if they have a big belly or big butt, a lot of times they're heading into this. But if you have an A1C level of 6.5% or higher on 2 separate tests, that's diabetes. Over 5.7 is insulin insensitivity, and it's an inexpensive test. You can screen for it, and then just go ahead and treat it. And studies show that diet outperforms drugs. Now, I like the Roadmap to Health diet for this, which does have a couple of things that are, have a higher glycemic load, but it also is very hypoallergenic. I remember one fellow had 400 blood sugar, and we took wheat away from him, gluten, and that normalized it for him. And the Roadmap to Health diet is kind of hyperallergenic. At the very least, have them pay attention to glycemic index and glycemic load. Really quickly, glycemic index is how fast a food will raise your blood sugar. Most fruits have high glycemic index, like watermelon or something, but they have a glycemic load. Okay, a glycemic load is how long and how sustainable the the increase in blood sugar is. And you want the patients, and I have on drvarnas.com, I have a list of foods. You want them to avoid foods with a glycemic load that's more than 10. And watching glycemic load rather than dietary fat has been researched and found to be a better way to deal with diabetes and prediabetes. Probably the most important nutrient you can give these patients is magnesium. It's been shown to lower A1C. It's also been shown to improve cholesterol and triglyceride levels. Magnesium can help prevent the transition from prediabetes to diabetes. And also, poor magnesium status has been linked to neuropathy in diabetics. But the most important thing is if they're insulin insensitive, they're not getting enough magnesium. Too much insulin interferes with the absorption and utilization of magnesium. So 75% of Americans are magnesium deficient, but just about everyone with insulin sensitivity or diabetes is magnesium deficient. And you want to take it on an empty stomach because it binds to fats in the diet, and you want to take it to bowel tolerance. What I mean by that is you take the very last thing at night before to go to bed, take one, and next day take two, take three. Magnesium will soften the stool, so you want to take it to the point where they get soft stools and back up. So if they get soft stools with 5 pills, have them take 4. And if they have high blood pressure, magnesium taurinate's your best choice. We'll get into this kind of stuff later. Magnesium orotate is good for people with cardiac problems. Another useful supplement for patients with diabetes or prediabetes is berberine. It performs similar to metformin. It lowers A1C, fasting blood glucose, and all that. And it's very well supported by studies, the berberine and blood sugar issues. Lots of studies. Okay. You also might consider using most of the companies, vitamin companies you may deal with have a multivitamin that's involved with lowering glucose. These will be high in B vitamins, things that make the Krebs cycle work. It'll have magnesium. A, D, and K have been studied. There's most of the companies have a formula like that. CGF from Zorex International is a particularly good one. It contains all the above nutrients, and it'll help address insulin insensitivity. And this is really good for your people, like you get someone's insulin insensitive and eating a lot of crap. You give them a product like this because you want to replace some of those vitamins that they've been missing over the years. Another issue while you're dealing with it, insulin insensitivity will eventually lead to fatty liver, which can eventually lead to biliary stasis. And biliary stasis is a situation where the bile becomes very thick and you don't produce as much of it. And it eventually can cause liver problem. It can actually eventually lead to cirrhosis. And eating sugar is strongly linked to biliary stasis. And these people will have, they won't get enough of fat. They have trouble absorbing essential fatty acids, and also vitamins A, E, D, and K might be in short supply. So these people, you'll find that they have digestive distress triggered by greasy food. Okay, the dry, itchy skin is really a key. Also, you see those, like cracked heels and things like that. Clay-colored stools, if it's bad enough, fat or grease in the stool, that's really bad. Also, a lot of your gastric reflux patients that don't respond, they're taking 3 different antacids and they're still got reflux, or very often they need support for biliary stasis. Also constipation. You got them drinking water or getting a lot of fiber in their diet and they're still constipated. Sometimes that's an issue. Bitter metallic taste in the mouth. Once again, the vitamin and the fatty acid deficiency. Sometimes they'll have a positive Murphy sign. There'll be pain under the right rib cage. This is recognized in medicine a lot of times. When a pregnant woman gets itchy skin, they'll realize it's from sluggish bile. So basically, treating biliary stasis, so you want to get insulin sensitivity under control, and that will help. And you want to thin the bile. There's products with an artichoke base, GB Complete from Zorex is an example. Other companies use a beet base. AF Beta Food from Standard comes to mind, and Beta TCP from Biotics comes to mind. The other thing is bile salts. Sometimes you take bile salts and help with the digestion, especially if they got very dry skin and the heels are cracking and things like that. Some practitioners will give bile salts. You have to be careful with bile salts because if you give them, the body goes, oh, goody, goody, I don't have to make them anymore. Generally, you have a day where you give 1 and 2, then 3, and then you don't give any. And so you kind of cycle through that. But for now, and use would be, just use a product to thin the bile. We'll talk about that later. And insulin insensitivity can cause inflammation. It's part of the reason so many diseases are associated with it, like heart disease. The chemicals that create and suppress inflammation are oil soluble, and type of fat in diet can promote or suppress inflammation. And everybody loves fish oil. You see a lot of short-term studies, fish oil reducing inflammation, helping cardiac issues, things like that, lowering cholesterol, and so on and so forth. The problem is the oceans are full of dioxin, mercury, and plastic, and plastic's really important. There's an area the size of Texas full of plastic, and recent research has shown that 77% of all Americans have plastic in their blood system. So fish oil might not be such a good thing. Also, there's some evidence that long-term it's not a good thing. So if you do use fish oil, use it for a little bit and then back off. We talk about lipoic acid, which you're more likely to use with diabetic than, type 2 diabetes, which most diabetics are, is insulin insensitivity that gotten out of hand. And it can lower triglycerides, and it helps with glucose control. But more importantly, it helps with neuropathy. There's a number of studies that if you have a diabetic that's getting neuropathy, usually you give 600 milligrams, 200 milligrams 3 times a day. That seems to be like the core things. A lot of the studies are done with IV, but you definitely want to get your diabetic patient with neuropathy on lipoic acid. Here's some more studies. So treatment in general, we're going to recommend the Roadmap to Health Diet, which you can download the PDF at drvarnes.com, or have them avoid foods with a glycemic load greater than 10. And there's a chart also on drvarnes.com. You want them to stop snacking. A lot of times, oh, I'm hypoglycemic, I have to have a snack. But what happens is every time you eat, you start producing insulin. So if you eat a meal, you produce insulin to store the calories. After about 3 hours, you start producing glucagon, which helps you break down those calories. So if you give somebody with insulin sensitivity, have them snacking, it doesn't work out really good. Intermittent fasting is a way of taking that glucagon, making glucagon last longer. And what that is you go about 16 hours between meals. So say you have your dinner at 6, you don't want to have breakfast until 10 the next day. You have to be a little bit careful because if they have serious adrenal problems, they won't do well with intermittent fasting. So, if they're got knee pain, tired, trouble getting out of bed, they stand up, they get a little dizzy, intermittent fasting might not be for them. Okay. Another part of the treatment is daily light exercise, which there's a bunch of studies. You want them to exercise every day, maybe a half hour, and be able to hold a normal conversation. Once again, they work out too hard, it has adrenal issues. Okay. As far as the supplements go, it depends on how sick they are. If they got a laundry list of symptoms, or their A1C is high or borderline diabetic or even diabetic, you want to give them more of the supplements that we talked about. So diabetes is just insulin sensitivity that's gotten out of hand, except for type 1 diabetes. These are people, what they call juvenile diabetes. It's a small minority, but people that grow into it as adults have that, okay? So CGF is the multiple for, if they've been eating crap for an extended period of time, or they got a lot of symptoms, they got headaches, they got PMS, they got, give them the multiple. Magnesium, orotate or taurate, depending if it's blood sugar, if you want to do cardiac, all of them, give everybody, if you find this, get them as much magnesium in them as you can. Berberine, you want to use, especially if they have gut issues. Berberine, the other thing that berberine does, and some people think that this is the mechanism that it helps diabetics, is it will kill bad bacteria and leave the normal bacteria alone. And the dosage for that is 500 milligrams 3 times a day. If they have the symptoms of biliary stasis and dry skin, itchy skin, things like, they're deficient in fat-based things, give them GB Complete, usually 2 with each meal. That will help a lot of things. And then Sunflax Complex, which is a flax oil, sunflower oil complex. It's a balanced omega-6, omega-3 products. You give them 2-3 times a day. Once again, fish oil. A lot of people love fish oil, but there are problems. And then if they are diabetic with neuropathy, you want to give them 200 milligrams of lipoic acid 3 times a day. So I'm going to post these webinars at drvarnes.com in order so people can take them at their leisure. The next few are going to be based on symptomquiz.com. It'll show you how to use it. This is a computerized program. Once again, it gives you clues of Shiraskin circle in the middle, how to support the inner part of the circle, fix infrastructure, without necessarily focusing on symptoms. Everyone wants to know how to fix diabetes, PMS, things like that. And really, if you just fix what you find, was Goodhart's old saying, and that will work for you. Okay, we'll see you next time.